So when it comes to hormonal imbalance, I had a practice for 17 years, and 80% of my practice was women, and 80% of those women came to me with hormonal issues, from fertility to PMS to perimenopause to postmenopause to arrhythmias to sleep problems to libido issues, all the things you hear around this. I never once in 17 years ever had to give an exogenous hormone to create balance in their hormonal milieu. Never once. 99.9% of the time, it came down to three things. I call it the three S's.
Ladies, if you have ever struggled with sleep or mood swings, fertility, menopause, or perimenopause symptoms, this one is for you. Dr. Nasha Winters is a world-renowned integrative oncologist, meaning she uses evidence-based complementary therapies such as nutrition, lifestyle, mind-body medicine to treat the whole person, not just the disease or symptoms. She is the author of this month's book in Book Nook, and she is a hormonal health expert who spent 17 years treating women with hormonal challenges and so much more. In today's conversation, she is going to leave you with so many beautiful insights and takeaways that you can apply today. I promise you do not want to miss this one. Okay, thank you, Nasha. I want to pivot into hormones because so many of the women in the community I know and that watch the podcast have so many questions on hormonal health. It's luckily, moving up in the world, it's so easy to access this information. And at the same time, just like we were talking about before, it's so overwhelming. So, I think when most people hear hormones, they think estrogen, menopause, maybe progesterone, but there's so much more to it than that. So can we just start with a brief explanation of overall, what are our hormones?
Sure. So first of all, hormones, it really is just a messenger system. That's it. And we have multiple glands in the body that need to communicate with each other. And none of them are in isolation. None of them are in a vacuum. And so the way medical systems work today, even functional, even naturopathic, even conventional, is we love to silo our systems. We just default to that. I don't know why, but we do. So we tend to tell women or men that, you're in menopause, you're in this, an aging phase and you need to focus, but they're looking through a very narrow lens because they're not asking, well, why did the hormonal communication system break down? What are the messages? Is it what you think it is? Right? And how do you know? And then how do you know if you're a candidate for some exogenous support or a candidate for some endogenous tweaking or a little bit of both? Right? And so one of the things I'm hoping to have for your community here, and I'm finalizing this soon, is basically like, what questions do I need to be asking about my own hormonal health? And it's about how is my body communicating to each other? So let me start from this big context again. When we come all the way down to it, our mitochondria are in charge of everything. And the little mighty mitochondria, these little organs within your cells, known as organelles, are the little powerhouses that we were all taught just make ATP, but they do a heck of a lot more than that. They do three major things beyond the production of energy. They take in information. So Dr. Saunders was just mentioning a moment ago, we're in information overload. And that's true on so many levels. And it's really picked up momentum in the last 150 years. So when you think about your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, your great-great-grandparents, they've never been exposed to the things we're exposed to today. We've brought in whole new way of farming, whole new way of nourishing, whole new way of chemical manipulation of our environment. These things didn't exist a generation or two ago. And so the first job of the mitochondria is to take in all of the input. So food, light, water, chemicals, exogenous hormones like, endocrine disrupting hormone, all the things go in. Second job is to translate that information. So if it's working well, has anyone ever tried your Google Translate and it sure did not come out the way you expected it to? We might break down in our translation sometimes, right? So that's the place that it's trying to make sense of all that information coming in. And then the third job is to communicate it back out. And it can communicate through cytokines, which are like inflammatory markers. It can communicate through hormone signaling, right? So this is where we're kind of heading here for this direction. But basically, the communication can get jammed, or it can be sort of like the operator game. I don't know if you are all old enough to remember the operator game, but it's like it starts with one word, and by the time it gets through 10 people, it's a whole nother concept altogether. This is basically what we're all experiencing today. But what happens in our medicalized culture, including from the natural realm, is we tend to want to look for one single problem and one single solution instead of saying, what else could be at play here?
Hey, we'll get right back to the episode, but I want to share one of my favorite incredible tools with you. You know, I'm all about sharing the tools that help make me feel as good as possible in the easiest way, right? So that's why I'm obsessed with the sauna space glow light. Our whole family loves it. And it's like having the benefits of morning and evening sunlight without having to step outside, especially when it's just not accessible, whether the weather is too cold or you're stuck at work all day. The red light therapy uses infrared technology to boost your energy, mood, and even your sleep. This is perfect for those days when you can't get outside but still want all the benefits of the natural light. I use this to start my day feeling grounded or to help me and our family wind down at night. It's so simple and easy to incorporate into your routine. If you've been wanting an easy way to bring the power of infrared technology into your life, check the links in the show description for my epic discount on Glow Light by Sauna Space. Now back to the show.
So when it comes to hormonal imbalance, I had a practice for 17 years in a little mountain town and 80% of my practice was women, and 80% of those women came to me with hormonal issues, from fertility to PMS to perimenopause to postmenopause to arrhythmias to sleep problems to libido issues, all the things you hear around this. I never once in 17 years ever had to give an exogenous hormone to create balance in their hormonal milieu. Never once. And as I moved deeper into the field of oncology, I had to even refine that further to understand that that could even potentially cause problems. Now, I know there's a lot of new information out there suggesting otherwise, but as someone who's been at this for 34 years, I've not seen that to be the case. I'm very data driven and I'm very individualized driven. I don't look at, theoretical. I mean, I look at the research, but I look at the patient in front of me and I look at their data and I look at how they're doing to determine what's right for them, not what one paper or one long RCT study suggested, because that's just a bell-shaped curve process. I'm looking at the N of one. But ultimately, I never needed to use that exogenous thing because we would always find why were their hormone signaling pathways jammed or translating incorrectly or miscommunicating incorrectly. And 99.9% of the time, it came down to three things. I call it the three S's. Okay. So sugar, insulin specifically, when 93% of us, definitely in America, but likely globally, are considered to be metabolically broken. That means we are not utilizing our sugars appropriately or we're getting too much of it. And everyone thinks they eat a low sugar diet until I have them do something like Chronometer, MyFitnessPal, or use a CGM or do some labs, like IGF-1, insulin, hemoglobin A1C, C-peptide, and then they realize, I'm walking around fully diabetic and never knew it because I look good. I look thin on the outside, but I'm super fat on the inside, which is what most of us on the planet are dealing with today, thanks to all this new information that's come in over the last 150 years. So we get that insulin corrected and a lot of levers get pulled and a lot of things change in how people feel. The second big driver is stress. So specifically cortisol, catecholamines, norepinephrine, epinephrine. And many of us even have genetics that make us even more wired for stress. I'm one of those people, so I have to go above and beyond, probably the average Joe does, to deal with my stress response chemistry, right? But cortisol, when cortisol's high, it stimulates insulin. So they bump into one another, right? And then the third, sometimes I say sleep, other times I say sex, and by sex meaning hormones, but it depends. Like it could actually be kind of like four S's really, because we think of like estrogen, progesterone, DHEA, testosterone, but we don't understand their relationships to one another and their balancing acts to one another. We keep looking for a quantity, but we need to go for a quality and a relational aspect to really understand how it's working. And then we lay that against a backdrop of your genetics, your single nucleotide polymorphisms, plus the functioning of your insulin and your cortisol, plus the functioning of your liver and your eliminatory pathways. And then and only then can you determine whether someone is truly deficient in certain hormonal, aspects or excess. And then the sleep pattern, when sleep is off, our insulin is off, our cortisol is off, our self-reliance is off, our self-regulation is off, and all of our hormones are off. And so a lot of times it's hard to know which one came first, the chicken or the egg. And so that's a hugely long answer into this piece here. But ultimately, when I would correct someone's insulin, someone's cortisol, and I would upregulate their oxytocin, which seemed to balance out the entire field of the rest of the sex hormones, and then really normalize their organs of elimination to help them process whatever they're putting through their bodies, as well as work on their sleep, there was never a need for exogenous hormonal support. And normally, I didn't even have to hit all those levers. Usually, if I just corrected one or two, everything would fall into play. And so, what's happened in the last, I left private practice in 2015. In the last 10 years, it's like we just completely forgot that part and we just quickly ran to a script pad to say everyone's just deficient in this. Now, I promise you, no one's deficient in hormones on the planet today. Okay. We're swimming in it. We're deficient in how our bodies are interpreting them, translating them, and communicating them. That's where we're having the problems. And so instead of adding more information in, we're helping look underneath to go, where's the real issue? And let's correct that. And then everything will align.
Beautiful. I mean, again, root cause, when we go to root cause, when we go a step before what you're seeing as the symptom,
Right.
when we go a step before and a level deeper than just putting a piece of tape so we no longer see the check engine light. When we're looking under the hood, like you just said, and we're saying, why is this happening? We're
Yeah.
no longer needing to use as much of or at all
Right.
the exogenous, meaning outside in hormones. So HRT, hormone replacement therapy, right, is what you're talking
Right.
about? Okay, so can we go through a few of these under the hoods
Sure.
and maybe even like best thing to do for each of them, the insulin, the cortisol, the oxytocin, and then maybe something that a lot of us are doing that we don't realize that's impacting it negatively?
I love it. Well, first of all, I want people to start with doing an audit on their everything they're putting in, on, and around them, including people, place, and things. So let me give you a couple examples. When we do our more extensive Terrain 10 questionnaire, which is not part of the book, it's a separate link, and we can get you guys that. It does a deeper dive. So I have so many patients who assumed they were doing everything right until they realized a few things. Like, here's some examples of a client I just consulted on this week. She was running a 5K every day. Basically, that was her workout routine. Now, as a perimenopausal woman, we need to be doing less and less cardio and more weightlifting to shift the metabolic machinery of our mitochondria and of our musculature, which basically sets the tone for our hormonal health and our longevity, right? And so that is a really big one, because as women, we were sort of taught never to lift, it will get big. Exercise by running it off or biking it off, or we get into other places, and that basically after the age of 35, I'm pulling women off their cardio routines. Once we get into the perimenopausal window, which can start in the mid 30s, I say it's time to shift gears. Like, you could have gotten away with your 5Ks, 10Ks, marathons in your teens and 20s. You don't have that liberty now. Your body needs different things at different seasons of your life. So that used to piss off a lot of my pro athletes in Durango, Colorado, which we are loaded with. And yet, when they would finally trust me, because we would have things like HRV devices on them. We would have things like continuous glucose monitors. We would have things like labs. We would have things like hormone metabolites. We weren't going by my dogma, folks. We were going by their data. And so they would see very easily when they were overdoing X, Y, and Z. So that was one example. The other example is looking at where they live. So I have a lot of affluent clients. People who come to folks like you and I tend to have a level of affluence because this is out of the box care. They're usually living on places like golf courses.
Pesticides.
And specifically glyphosate, which is your largest endocrine disruptor. They tend to be reaching for a lot of those yummy high-end like gluten-free treats, which are just highly processed foods, even though it's organic and cleaner. It's not, or they're coming from the idea that vegetarian or vegan is better because they were taught that somewhere along the way, which for some people that may be the case, but it's actually very rare that I see that be the case, at least in the Western world. And even in the East, in the Far East, where that has been for millennia, we've changed the food systems that now that same food system that nourished now poisons. And that's thanks to things like pesticides and glyphosate that is now just infused into all the pulses, all the legumes, all the grains of that region of the world are completely polluted with endocrine disruption, which is why India now surpasses the United States in diabetes and cancer. And yet this is a food they depended on for millennia, and now it's killing them. It's like, okay, well, the world isn't going to adapt, so we have to, right? The agricultural system isn't going to adapt, so we humans have to. And that can go against some spiritual belief systems, some ethical belief systems, but we have to remember that God did not design like pesticides, right? That we were these designed perfect beings, and yet what we've brought on for convenience and what we've evolved to today has caused us a lot of harm. And we have to just be realistic about that. And it's not a judgmental thing, it's just an observation and a reality. And so, looking at maybe things that served you at some phase of your life may no longer serve you at another phase of your life. And so, at auditing, maybe going through your house and looking at everything in your medicine cabinet, what's under your kitchen sink, what's in your bathroom, what's in your cleaning products of your household, what's in your pantries, what's in your freezer. If there are things in there that are more than, words that you can't pronounce or are highly, considered, like you can run them through beauty. There's a couple different online apps, which I'm sure you guys have talked about, to run them through. Like if they represent anything lower than a B grade, get rid of them. Those are the things that are adding insult to injury. Anything with fragrance, holy cow, I can walk into someone's house and immediately get sick from fragrance. So you have to be mindful of that. Every time you get into your new car smell that you all love so much, that is one giant toxic cesspool. It's actually, or new clothes that you're not thinking about when you put these beautiful, clothes on your body, unless they're made from like organic hemp, bamboo, wool, silk, you are getting the largest organ of absorption of your body is taking that in. Have you all seen the studies about tampons? I think they were saying we average over 7,000 tampons in our lifetime. That's one of the biggest sources of toxic chlorine, of dioxins, of known carcinogens. And we are literally putting that up against the most vulnerable, sensitive, absorptive tissue of our body from the moment we start menstruating until we stop. Like that is just horrifying to me. And then the underwear and the yoga pants and all things like what's more remarkable to me, you guys, is that we don't all have cancer all the time.
When you think about it like that, when you think about how much we're surrounded by it, yeah. Well, then you've got to think there is like, I don't want to say genetics because we know now genetics can be turned on and off by environment, but there is, there is something else there. The community, the connection, the trauma, our hardwiring that absolutely contributes. And, I don't know how other people feel that are listening to this, but when I first had my eyes open to all of this, I was so overwhelmed when I was like, oh my God, now what do I do? And this was, 10, 20 years ago before it was so much out there. But what I do, even today, when I get a new piece of information, if there's a few things, I'm like, okay, I got to change these 3 things. I'll pick one.
Right.
And then I'm like, okay, in 6 months, I'll do the next one. So like maybe this year it's your cleaning products.
Right. Exactly.
And maybe next year it's your, whatevers. But like I would imagine there's a hierarchy of like what you're putting on you and in you
Yes.
is the most important.
Agreed. Agreed. Like what's at the end of your fork is going to probably be the most important because you're doing that several times a day. Every day of then the next step would be, like what you're putting on your body care products. Because again, largest absorption of your body, taking that on. And then one piece after another of sort of changing out. So I tell folks like once you've run out of say this laundry detergent, then switch to the next, right? Once you run out of that toilet paper or tampon product, then switch to the next. Like this is where it's just one change up after another. I can remember going through this process myself of just the realization of all the things I was being exposed to on a daily basis. And you're right, that can be information overload. That can be overwhelm. And so I love that you bring up that's like any step, any change is so critically helpful. And the hierarchy doesn't even matter. It's like, what is even the most accessible? Like maybe it is something less expensive or easier for you. These are the places that we're having this conference here come October, which brings in folks who are helping people understand where to find your food, where to find your water, where to find your body care products, where to find your best supplements or nutrients to help your mitochondria thrive versus dive, where to find your essential oils that are not going to mess with your endocrine system, where to find, like, these are the resources, where to find your oxygen therapies. This is the place we're trying to bring together environmental medicine, metabolic medicine, and regenerative agriculture and soil health all under one roof, because all of those pieces depend on each other to make a dent. And so this is just a living laboratory life education process. And there's varying degrees of, some of you may be coming in right now already at a gold standard, like you're already doing all the things. Maybe your neighbor is still using dryer sheets that are blowing into your house. Like, that's it. Or maybe you are living on that golf course that you thought was so, pristine, like, hey, we've made it in life and here we are. Well, that might just really require you to make sure you leave your shoes off at the door, that you absolutely have a whole house air filtration. If you're going to be in that position, then you need to adapt with it. Right? If you're going to continue to eat the pulses and grains, even if they're organic, they naturally sequester things like glyphosate. Well, maybe you take your shot of organic raw sauerkraut juice every day, which is high in humic acid, which will dissolve down that glyphosate and help clear it out of your body. Like, these are the things that we have, the if this, then this scenario, that I never give people the bad news unless there's something they can do about it. And so that audit starts of just like knowing what's in, on, and around you. Even your HOA is a huge, because a lot of times they will require that you spray down the weeds and you do the things. Like, this is where you become aware, but you also become an advocate for yourself and your loved ones. And even more importantly, you become an activist. You become the messenger. You might get shot at. Welcome to my world, right? But ultimately, the only way things will change is no one's going to do it for us. We have to take it upon ourselves to do it ourselves.
So true. So powerful. No one's coming to save you. Mm-hmm.
Sad, but true. Yeah.
Sad, but true. I love that. I think something that's so important in the age of all the information is to test. This is where I think testing shines, because then you know where to point. So tell me your opinion on testing. Hey, real quick. I love tools that help us feel more grounded and connected, right? That's why I am obsessed with a higher dose PEMF mat. It's my go-to for the moments when life feels overwhelming and I just need a reset. This mat uses PEMF technology to help calm your nervous system, reduce stress, and recharge your energy, all in just a few minutes. So whether I'm taking a break from life, looking to unwind after a hectic day, recover from workouts, or just simply catch my breath, it's like giving my body that ultimate recharge. So seriously, if you're looking for an easy way to feel balanced and relaxed, you've got to check it out. For all my favorite higher dose products and an epic discount code just for you, check out my links in the description. Now let's get back to the show.
I'm a huge fan. I mean, some people think I'm just taking all their blood, but I love the basics. So the basics for me are a CBC, which is a complete blood count, which tells me so much about the operating system of your immune system. That's like an $11 out-of-pocket test. Right? It's just, I love this test. It tells me more than just about any test out there, and it's so underutilized even in standard of care. A metabolic panel, a CMP, complete metabolic panel, this shows me your organ function and your electrolytes. It gives me a really good snapshot about that. Also super inexpensive. You could do a direct to consumer if you can't get your doctor to order this for you. I also look at what I call my trifecta, which is C-reactive protein, lactase dehydrogenase, and sedimentation rate. That shows me sort of the landscape of your mitochondrial function, your inflammatory process, and again, your immune system, how it's expressing. And then I love to look at things like fibrinogen activity. So a blood clot, like how thick and sticky is your blood? We want our blood to be really viscous. We want it to be flowing smoothly. So that tells us about your hydration status. It tells you about some of your potential to create blood clots or other issues, and it can really change things in your environment when things are flowing. right? Maybe says, hey, we need some more fish oil in here, or hey, we need some more anti-inflammatory foods, or what have you. It's a good clue for that. I love to look at a full thyroid panel. Most people today are walking around with thyroid dysfunction and don't even know it. In fact, by the time we're 70 years old, we all have thyroid cancer and we'll die with it, not of it, for the majority of us. But our thyroids are getting hit with so much radiation today. It's very, very sensitive to radiation. And so it's no wonder that it reacts in that way. So we want to make sure we're having our really good quality salt, which is really loaded with the minerals. We want to make sure we're having some seaweeds, some fish, things that really bring in the supportive nutrients for our thyroid. We want to look at our iron storage, something called ferritin. And most of the time in the cancer space, most people think you're iron deficient. You're actually almost all the time, patients are almost always iron excess. And excess iron creates a lot of inflammation, known as reactive oxygen species, which also makes you more vulnerable to cardiovascular disease and brain diseases and liver diseases and inflammatory processes like arthritis. And so sometimes a good bleeding is actually what the doctor ordered. So a little blood donation, if you're too high, you can really lower that. And people like Chris Kresser and Chris Masterjohn and a few others out there really speak to the importance of making sure your iron levels are not too high or not too low. And women are often immediately thrown to be pushed onto iron supplementation, even, just thinking that we're wiping it out every month, but we tend to be sequestering it now more than ever before. So those are just some examples. And a vitamin D3 and an insulin level tells me pretty much all I need to know about how your body is holding up, how its nutritional status, its immune status, its inflammatory status, and its resilience status is doing. And so that's kind of my general lay of the land. But things, if you want to add a cherry to the top, I look at your SNPs, your single nucleotide polymorphisms. So these are now direct to consumer labs like Nutrition Genome or 3x4 Genetics. These will tell me your patterns or your propensities. And as Dr. Saunders mentioned, we about 95% of the time we can change the way our genes express. Right. So that is through our diet and lifestyle. So it shows you what are your vulnerable spots and how can you overcome them. And so that's a really exciting time. It also shows me your what we call your pharmacogenomics. So it shows me how you're going to respond to certain medications, certain supplements, certain nutrients, and even gets down to what diet is going to work best for you. Mm-hmm. So a lot of folks will think, like I did. I thought for a long time, the early stage of my diagnosis, I thought I need to be a vegan because that's what it was telling me back in 1991. And that information almost killed me because I was getting more and more dogmatic as I kept trying to be a better and better vegan all along. And I was getting more and more and more depleted, missing more and more and more of the cofactors that were required for me to detoxify and methylate all that my body was taking on. And so I could not heal in that space. And so for me, I learned to then graduate on, much to my chagrin, because I had a very mental idea about this. But my SNPs helped me understand, Nasha, as much as you want to be a vegan or a vegetarian, that does not serve your blood sugar, your immune system, your building blocks in a good way. It just didn't for me. Whereas my husband, who would love to be a carnivore, he actually would do better as more of a vegetarian, forward, Mediterranean, pescatarian. Like that actually is optimal in his chemistry. So these are the types of tools that we can get so specific today that you and I, Dr. Saunders, did not even have access to 10, 15 years ago. And now we can get so individualized. It's a fun time to be part of medicine because if you go to, I've gone to this giant biohacker conference, 3,200 people, and you are walking around thinking you need all the toys and all the devices and all the things and all the supplements and all the biohacks to go. And yet, if you actually get to know yourself through a few simple labs and through SNPs, you will know exactly how much or how little to exercise, how much or how little to fast, how much or how little to take certain supplements or nutrients. Like you don't have to guess. And that saves you a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of guessing.
So powerful. So I'm going to make sure we link those tests down below. This also, I think, is super helpful for anyone who's maybe gotten their labs run at traditional doctors and has been told they're fine, their blood work is clear, but they know something's wrong.
Yes. Oof. Well, and you guys remember, well, maybe they don't know yet, but labs today are based on the average of the population. And knowing that 93% of us are metabolically unhealthy, do you want to be average? Like, I want everyone to be outliers. I want everyone to be their own N of one. And so one thing that's about ready to launch, and it'll probably come out by first quarter of 2026, is a kind of a testing process. So a lot of your listeners, and probably you as well, have heard about like Dr. Mark Hyman's Function Health, which is like for $4.99, you get this set of labs, and then 6 months later, you get another set to see if you change things. And it has some very high level recommendations. Now, I don't mean to sound harsh or critical, but those labs are still being funneled through the standard of care ranges,
Oh,
meaning that so when we toggle between standard of care labs in the optimal lab ranges, when you toggle between the two, when I get a full panel of labs and I show you what your standard of care doctors are going to tell you about your labs versus what somebody like me or someone I've trained will tell you about your labs, it is night and day difference. We pick up on the 80% of things that they're missing. We find it while things are just like a tiny smoldering ember in your basement versus a house engulfed in flames. By the time standard of care says this is a problem, it's a big problem and it's been a problem for a while. And so we are excited to bring something that's even more sensitive and specific to optimal ranges that's about to land out there for folks at a very, even a less cost point than what Function Health is for people to do a deeper dive of true prevention and a deeper understanding of their terrain to know I've got some tendencies here that I could be dealing with long before I even had the first indication there's something going on.
love that. Yeah. One way we've described it too, and you just did so eloquently, when you go to your traditional doctor, they're going to look for black and white,
Yeah.
fine and broken. And if you fall in the gray, you're
Oof.
dismissed as either totally normal or there's something wrong with you and you're likely to get an antidepressant or something, right? There is just not a lot of power in the gray. And just like Nasha said at the beginning, these are things that these are things that you have access to, these are things that your body's telling you.
Yeah.
And so, especially for the woman who's been told you're fine and you're not, it's time to step outside the traditional medical model
Yeah.
and go somewhere, going back full circle where you're seen and you're heard, right?
Yes.
We now know what an incredible impact that has on us and how many of us have sat in doctor's offices where we're looked at like we're crazy when we know we don't feel right.
Right. Right. And that's where I know you and I know Dr. Datis Karazian, a
Mm.
well-known chiropractor who's written a lot of great books on like brain health, thyroid health, gut health. This man has such a brain, a systems thinking brain, and he's created such a narrower view of how to interpret labs in a different way. And I've built on his methodology as well as Dick and Weatherby and a few others out there in sort of the functional medicine lab ranges, which boy, howdy, can they serve the population so much more than how we are currently serving them. And to your point, it's like it creates a level of awareness and a level of empowerment that gets people to be pushing back against the narrative to say, you're telling me I'm fine, but let me show you another viewpoint. And what I've found is when I've shown conventionally trained clinicians a more nuanced gray level of labs to show patterns and tendencies, their minds are blown away. So 70% of the clinicians that come through my training are conventionally trained clinicians. And that's one of their favorite parts of this course is that they get to look through the lab lens through a very different one, right? It's a very different experience for them. And suddenly they realize that they've missed 80% of the issues of their patients. And what the bigger piece is they have disbelieved their patients
Mhm.
all of those years. And so now this is a means to get us all to the table together. That the clinician can believe when the patient says something's not right, something's off. That is so powerful for both parties because, first of all, it's a heck of a lot easier to deal with things when it's just a smoldering ember as a clinician, as well as a patient saying, something's just not right. I can't put my finger on it. Wow, think about that combination. We suddenly switch from disease management to health creation. Like,
Mhm.
what a totally mind altering difference of healthcare today, true healthcare.
Yeah, so beautiful. I was going to ask you what your hope is, where we're going, and I think that's it, right?
100%. Like we need to give our clients or patients, however you want to define them, a lot more credit right? I also believe that doctors limit their patients by saying, that's too hard for them to follow this diet, or it's too hard for them to read this book, or too hard for them, or too expensive for them to take this test. As someone who's had so many patients who've come to me where standard of care has failed them, or other functional practitioners have failed them, they're invested. Like they want to be part of the conversation. They want to be active participants. They're willing to do what it takes to change how they're feeling.
Yeah.
They just need someone to be willing to go along with them and to see it and to think outside of the box. And that is what I believe. I believe it's not been the clinicians that are changing healthcare, it's the patients. The patients are getting far more savvy. Maybe that is the blessings of, today's AI and today's Facebook groups and today's, online forums and whatnot that didn't exist. So from that one place of the overwhelm, there's also a place of confidence building and of self-awareness. And so it can be harnessed for good. And I believe that it's you guys, the patients, that are changing this narrative versus someone like me who's been shouting about it for over 30 years. It's like, the consumer is who will change things, not the clinician.
100%. We're seeing that in the food industry. We vote with our dollars, and, we now know that so many of us are negatively impacted by not feeling seen and heard. Well, it starts with us, guys. Like, if we're not seeing and hearing ourselves, how can we expect anyone, including our practitioners, to?
Exactly.
I love this pendulum swing.
Yay.
Dr. Nasha, I have so many more questions. I want to talk about seed cycling and what seeds to eat to balance hormones. I want to talk about circadian rhythm. I want to do a deeper dive into some of the therapies that you were talking about. And we're going to pivot that conversation into the private Zoom room for my VIP members. So I am going to link all the resources below, including your incredible upcoming event that you have in October, where you were saying someone can literally land in there and just know and trust this is the best water filter system. This is what to use for your air filter. Like all the things. This is a show not to miss. If you guys can go, we'll link that below. All your resources. But before we pivot into the other room, is there anything that I missed for the general population that you want to leave them with?
Golly, I mean, first of all, I think you rounded out a lot. We went into some heavy duty places, especially conversations that are really in everyone's face right now. I mean, hormones, the political landscape, the medical landscape. Girl, I think you covered it.
I think you covered it.
I mean, I was like, can anybody else out there? Or is there something else that you're just like hankering to know or talk about? Yeah.
Well, when anyone watches this interview, they can put the comments below. I can always reach out. You can pick Dr. Nasha's brain a little bit more. And then always, the links will be below for them to follow you. Thank you, Dr. Nasha. For those of you who watched the YouTube and for those of you who listen on the podcast platform, go ahead and click that share button and send this to someone you love in your life. Thank you so much for being here.
My absolute joy. Thank you.